Hello, everyone. I want to thank you for attending our panel discussion series on families, children, and remote early learning. This is part 3, technology and young children. My name is Ross Nunamaker. I go by Chad, and I am the Executive Director and Communication Manager for Southwest Ohio AEYC. I will be facilitating today's panel discussion. And since this is a panel discussion, we cannot hear or see participants, so you do not need to worry about your mic or your camera being on. I want to start by thanking the sponsors of this discussion series: Butler County Educational Service Center, Miami Valley Child Development Centers, and C-Word Design. The Butler County ESC, or Educational Service Center, serves all the districts in Butler County, Ohio, and additional districts in neighboring counties consisting of over 52,000 students. They are an ESC that believes in serving all families with children prenatal to 21 by being partners in shaping lives with schools, families, and communities. They provide a wide array of services, including Help Me Grow early intervention and home visiting, central coordination for Ohio Department of Health prenatal to 3 for a 9-county region, special education preschool and state ECE, professional development, curriculum and special services for schools and communities, education at the Butler County Juvenile Justice Center, which is graduating students every year, and alternative programming for students at Union Day. All these things are done with integrity, compassion, respect, and being family focused. The Butler County ESC has been a top workplace 7 years in a row. For more information, visit bcesc.org. Miami Valley Child Development Centers, Inc. serves more than 2,500 Head Start children at 63 sites and partner programs in Montgomery, Butler, Clark, Greene, and Madison counties. Over 80% of their programs are highly rated under Ohio's Step Up to Quality initiative, and they operate Ohio's largest early Head Start program. Based in Dayton, MVCDC employs more than 550 individuals, 10% of whom are former or current Head Start families. The mission of Miami Valley Child Development Centers, Inc. is to deliver exceptional early childhood education and develop compassionate partnerships with families to support them in realizing their hopes and dreams. For more information, visit mvcdc.org. Having trouble with personalizing learning for struggling readers, especially for remote students? C-Word can help. C-Word provides evidence-based methods to develop the skill and will to read. From student-teacher apps such as C-Word School, which allows pre-K to first grade teachers to build their own lesson plans, personalize learning, and track results, to C-Words Anywhere that turns any digital content into an educational opportunity to help struggling readers of any age. We have the tools to help you and your students be successful. Learn more at c-words.com. Now let's get to the panelists. We are fortunate to have 5 wonderful panelists tonight. Panelists, please introduce yourselves when you see your picture appear.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jenni Jacobs. I have been in early childhood for about 25 years, 26 years now. I run the Learning Professor, which creates online coursework for early child care professionals. In the past, I've been an instructional designer, so I've worked a lot with technology and online learning with adults. So that's a little bit of my background.
Hi, my name is Rachel Konerman, and I've spent most of my time in the field of early childhood education as a classroom teacher for preschoolers at the Arlett Center, which is the University of Cincinnati's lab school. And I also am on their faculty teaching pre-service teachers in the licensure program for pre-K through soon to be 5th grade. And I am a teacher trainer and a member of SWAYC.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline Leader, and I am a trainer and consultant. I also teach for the University of Cincinnati in our early learning online program. I do a lot of student teaching and the Reflections capstone class. I also adjunct at other universities. Before my son was born, I was the director and lead preschool teacher at Miami University Hamilton's on-site childcare center. And I also have a master's in instructional design and technology, which bridges that early childhood and the technology component.
Hey everybody, happy Friday. My name is Angie McDonald and I am a manager for the early childhood department with Cincinnati Public Schools. I have been in the field for about 20 years and held roles such as classroom teacher, administrator, and even home visitor. So I look forward to the conversation tonight. Thank you for being here.
Hello, I'm William Mosier, Professor of Child Development at Istanbul University in Istanbul, Turkey, currently. I've been in the field for 30 years. My whole adult life has been working in early childhood education as Head Start teacher, Head Start center director, then program director and director of migrant Head Start programs throughout California, as well as a public school teacher in the inner city in St. Louis.
All right, thank you to all of our panelists for participating today. We will begin with a general discussion, and then if we have time, we'll be addressing questions that you might have live. We'll also be addressing some questions that were submitted during the registration. So during the session tonight, feel free to submit questions in the Q&A, which will be in the bottom middle of your Zoom screen, or you can also submit questions in the chat box. We may not have time to get to every question that's submitted tonight, but we'll do our best. So let's go ahead and get started.
Awesome, thanks, Chad. So I wanted to start, first of all, with a couple of the questions that were submitted that we covered in previous sessions. So in the first session, we talked about developmentally appropriate practice in online learning. And in the second session, we talked about parent support, family support. So those are available on the SWAYC website. You can access those recordings, and Chad can tell you more about how to do that a little bit later. But there were a couple of questions about helping parents navigate or become more interested, helping parents realize that everyday activities really are learning. And we did talk a lot about that in the second session. Tonight, we're really going to focus on technology and young children. And, you know, I think one of the questions that I wanted to start with, because it sort of leads us into this whole discussion about children and motivation. We had a question that was submitted about children that don't want to learn, or that come to school and don't know any of the typical things that teachers might expect children to know. And I wanted to start off with that by saying that all children learn all the time. It's not something that we have to teach them to do. It's not something that we have to get them to want to do. They're learning. It's just a matter of what are they learning and what are we putting out in front of them to learn. And one of the things that we can do to really help parents, and even in this time of virtual learning, is key into what are children interested in? How do they express their learning? How do they express their excitement and motivation? And I'll just give you a really quick example, because this was a question I wanted to get to last time and we didn't get a chance to. So I was teaching CDA class, and we'd been talking about Gardner's theory of multiple intelligence. And one of the girls said, you know, I have this 4.5-year-old and I have been trying and trying and trying to teach her alphabet, you know, and I've been using flashcards and it's not working. She doesn't know any of her letters. She doesn't even know the letters in her name. And I said, well, what do you think her primary intelligence is if you look at Gardner's theory? Like, what do you think she might be most interested in? And she said, oh, definitely kinesthetic learning. She's always moving. And I said, okay, so put the flashcards. We're not going to use them as flashcards anymore because that's not appropriate for early childhood. But take your flashcards, and I want you to put one set along one wall and the other set along the other wall, and have her run back and forth to match the letters. And as she's matching the letters, when she picks one up, just say the name of the letter. And she said, how's she going to learn that way? And I said, just trust me. Just say the name of the letter as she's running back and forth and making matches. And she came back to CDA that next week, and she said, I don't believe it. She knows almost every alphabet letter. And so one of the things we have to keep in mind is that we don't have to make this bigger than it is. We just have to let children play and teach parents how to present content to children in a way that matches children's interests and abilities. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight on how to transfer that kind of a thing into a virtual context. So I want to start with, I think, the biggest question in everybody's mind, and that is screen time. How much screen time is appropriate? How, should we be paying attention to the limits that have been previously established? Is it different now that we're doing remote learning? And I'm going to be really honest. To my knowledge, and Chad, I know you're really into all the research right now, so correct me if you know something different. But to my knowledge, this is all too new for us to know how remote early learning affects children. I believe Chad had talked about a study that came out not too long ago, right before the pandemic, that kind of said virtual early learning wasn't great for children, but then all of a sudden we got thrust into this.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, there's been several studies. Gosh, I mean, and Dr. Mosier can speak to this too.
More than several.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to before people even knew about remote early learning, to the mid 90s even. But yeah, it's funny because what I was actually referencing was there was a article that the CEO of NACI wrote and publicized very heavily right before all this happened, and it was titled "There's No Such Thing as Online Preschool," and so the timing was, kind of interesting because it was literally right before the pandemic hit. And so, but yeah, I mean, even though there's the pandemic, the only guidance I've seen that's been different is some researchers have said, if you're giving a little bit of extra screen time and that's making your household run more smoothly, that then you can kind of say that maybe it's helping with the mental health and the stress management of the parents, and then that would result in better, and that would offset some of the negative effects. But as a general rule, we still want to stick with the guidelines that have been in place for years under screen time, because just because there's a pandemic doesn't mean that children are suddenly developmentally different. It just means that we might have to change our approaches in ways that are new to us, but that really have been around for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, thanks. And Bill, can you talk a little bit about some of the existing research or guidelines? We've had different guidelines from World Health and from American Academy of Pediatrics and AEYC. Can you talk just a little bit about some of that?
Sure. The reality that people don't want to hear is that not just the American Academy of Pediatrics, but the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association are all in agreement that children under 2 should have 0 screen time. And children over 2, and let's not use ages as the hard and fast determiner. What they mean is language competence. If a child now can talk in 2-word sentences, then you might consider an hour or 2 a day of screen time, but with the adult right with the child during the screen time activity. Then longitudinal studies about screen time and its impact on learning and later learning is so overwhelmingly negative that it's just the presentations I've given in many places in Ohio, people are shocked to hear the evidence. Children who spend more than 2 hours a day of screen time in their first 8 years of life tend to score lower on ACT and SAT scores than children who have no screen time during early childhood. So whether or not we have a pandemic that's led to this supposed need for some sort of screen time learning, as Jenni said, learning is occurring every nanosecond in the life of a human being. And so children are copying everything we adults are doing. The issue is, what are we doing that might be of educational value to a growing mind? So the real issue here isn't the screen time, it's the adults and how the adults are interacting with their child, or the adults who happen to, through remote learning, using some virtual class, how are they interacting with the children? And Jeannie's perfect example was of having the children, this one particular child, being physically moving during a learning activity. Any kind of screen time activity has got to be physically active, engaging the children and doing some physical activity. Most of you are probably familiar with the chant that children do in primary grades about the alphabet and the letters. Those kinds of things could be an activity that one would consider doing, but specifically, screen time needs to be limited. Even if we think watching Disney movies is good for little kids, for the most part, they're not good until the end of early childhood. I know people want to say Frozen is a beautiful movie. I certainly cry at every Disney movie, but I'm an adult. I love Disney movies, but it's a stretch for anybody to think Beauty and the Beast is healthy for a 3, 4, or 5, or 6, or 7, or 8-year-old female to watch, because of the message that it's sending about male violence in the life of a woman. So I better not take this any further.
Ooh, I feel like I need to revisit that one now, see what the message is. I know, and I am a mother of a young girl who's 3 years old, and Disney culture and princess culture is a real thing, which finds its insidious way into the young girl's life, even if you don't partake in watching full-on Disney movies. But I will.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
When we're talking before about the possibility that it might alleviate some mental strain on adults to plug them in a little. I mean, as a mom of a 3-year-old child who knows what's good for young children in development, I can tell you that my 3-year-old child has had more screen time in the last 2 months than she did her entire life leading up till now. And one of the caveats that they've always given on those guidelines is that if it's being used to promote connection, like FaceTiming or now Zooming or whatever, that we can make allowances for that. And I think that what's come out in more recent research, though, because of the situation we've been put in, is that even still we need to watch and limit it, because as adults they're doing some research now, because we've all been thrust into this situation, which might not have been, we wouldn't have necessarily put research subjects into this situation, right? But now here we are, so we can study that. And what we've seen is that there's this real thing called Zoom fatigue, which it's Zoom because that's a very common platform, but it's really any platform, any kind of real-time connection platform causes this same kind of fatigue for us. And what it is that it's all these little things that are different about our communication through the screen than they would be face-to-face. Things like, am I making eye contact with Angie right now? I feel like I am because I'm looking at her, but it doesn't feel like that to her. And all these little things that our brain as adult brains are adjusting to are very challenging for children. Things like floating heads in the screen, big heads looming down on you, the constant presence of your own self in the screen, which is not something we're used to having to navigate, even down to the tiniest like glitch in an internet connection that could lead to lack of real-time communication, or even the very nanosecond difference between when I speak and you hear me, which is amazing that it's only a nanosecond, right? But all these things add up to exhaust our minds to the point where, like, I don't know about all of you, but I find myself, if I have more than 2 or 3 sessions in a day, even if they're only an hour long, I'm exhausted. And we know that children need it to be even shorter. That best practice around these kind of things shows that they need to be even shorter than that. And so even for those caveats, even for this educational time, we have to remember that this is still putting a lot of strain on their minds, on their developing brains. And we, like I said, we wouldn't have necessarily put ourselves here, but here we are. And it might be interesting and scary to see what it did to the brain wiring of these children after this prolonged time of screen exposure is over.
And I think we also want to think about how we're presenting this as far as group sizes and how we're collaborating with the children. Again, as we've said through these 3 sessions, what we do in the normal classroom is the same things that we want to apply in the virtual world. I know a lot of people are doing large group sessions with the children and book reads and things like that, and that's fantastic. But remember, group time for our young infants and toddlers, we're not doing that in a classroom normally. Or if it is, it's if you want to come over and sing with me, if you want to come over and pay attention to the book, come on over. And to know that the children will scoot in and out just like they do in your classroom. So think about if that for our young ones is really what we want to do. For our preschoolers and some of the older children, they can handle it a little bit better, but we're talking 10 to 15 minutes for large group is what we want in a classroom. So we don't want to do any more than that in a virtual situation to begin with. And again, to notice, as Rachel said, some of that disconnect that's happening where they might be further back or they might be distracted by something off the screen, and it may look like they're not engaged. And that's okay, because that's what we need to have them be able to be comfortable with. The other thing is with a large group is all of the pictures, like Rachel said, all of the pictures that we have, and you can put in a big grid or small grid, but it is exhausting even when I give trainings with 30, 40 people to be trying to scroll through all these pictures. The children aren't going to be able to do that, and it's going to be really hard for them to make the connection with the grids on there. So something to consider that's going to be even better for them is small groups, 3 to 5. And I give a lot of trainings on doing small groups in classrooms, and that's the size that I suggest for any classroom small group. So consider doing that if you're going to do that in a Zoom format or whatever platform you're using to do those small groups. They can see 4 or 5 children and the teacher much easier in a grid. It makes more connections. You can do more talking with them individually. They have a better chance to share their own voice. And then you can engage them a little bit more and do, as we talked about before, do a little bit more assessment that way. But consider, instead of those large groups, even a simple book read with 3 to 5 children instead of 17 children is going to help them connect a little bit more. But no, they're also going to disengage, and that's okay. They have that fatigue like we have the fatigue, and it is such a different viewpoint to not be sitting next to us in a classroom, but to be so far away. And to know that that's going to happen, and we try to re-engage them with our regular facilitation techniques we use, our scaffolding techniques we use. But sometimes, just like I tell my students at UC, sometimes it's okay to say, hey, this group time's not working. Let's just go ahead and call it and end your group time. And just say, it's not the day to do this today, and end it. And that's the same thing we'd be doing in the classrooms as well.
So Jackie,
Sorry, I just wanted to piggyback quickly on something Rachel mentioned, and that was the idea that we as adults will get tired too. And so as the classroom teacher, running these large groups and small groups and maybe creating videos to share with your classroom, I think from that perspective, we need to remember that we do not have to fill a school day's worth of time in a Zoom call or in a video session. These short little vignettes that Jackie's talking about are really important, not only for the children, but also for us as adults. We need to make sure we're taking breaks for ourselves, get up, move around, make sure that the parents understand why we don't have Zoom school from 8 to 3 or 8 to 12 or whatever that the case might be. So I think what's interesting is I think about the adult perspective in this screen time is teachers want to do a good job. Parents want to make sure their children are doing all of the things that they need to do to be prepared for whatever's next. And yet this is different. And so we have to acknowledge that it's different and remember that when we're in a school building or we're in a classroom, we have all the transition time that happens. We have meals and snacks that occur. We have a rest time. And so keeping those things in mind as we plan our day for our groups of children is really important, and sharing that information out loud with our parents, because sometimes we as professionals think that everybody knows what we're thinking in our mind, and yet I find it really helpful to, if I'm thinking it, I write it down and I make sure I say it out loud, because sometimes it isn't a natural thought to have.
And, you know, when you're talking, Angie, about the fatigue as well, I mentioned doing small groups, but one thing I would like to say about that, and I say this when I talk about small groups in the classroom as well, is don't feel you have to do a small group for every child every day. Think in terms of the week. So, you know, maybe you have, instead of a large group, you have, every day you have a small group, and it's different children that are in that small group, because it decreases the amount of fatigue they have, and it decreases the amount of fatigue you have. So again, when you're thinking small groups, don't think I have to run all of my children in my class every day through a small group, because that's going to exhaust you and it's going to exhaust them. But think over the time of a week or 2 weeks or whatever time period you want. Again, it's important you're making connections with the children in your class in a quality and meaningful way for both you and the families.
So one of the questions that we had gotten for this one was, how do we maintain children's attention during a virtual activity, and how do we maintain high levels of participation and engagement was another question. And I think, you know, the idea of doing these things in small groups is going to be really key to that. But I also, what other ideas do you have about making it exciting enough to hold their attention? You know, I always say that it's the teacher's job. If the children aren't paying attention in group time, it's the teacher's job to change what's happening to get their attention. You know, so if you're trying to do calendar time and the children aren't interested, that probably means calendar time is not a good idea. So what feedback would you give to a teacher that's saying, how do I maintain their attention? Anyone?
I think it's really important to keep it so just like when Jackie was mentioning small groups, right? So we plan for that. We plan around children's interests. So if it's small group or if it's larger group, the fact that it's planned around their interests will help. So it's not the same group for everyone. Maybe it's the way you read the book aloud, remembering to say their names, making it feel personal and connected to them, saying like, oh, Jackie, I remember that you told me in the phone call we had the other day that you were really interested in ladybugs. And so I found this book about ladybugs I thought we could read together, and help them remember how these things are all connected and what it does mean to them. And remembering to mix things up, you know, sing a song, read a book, like do all the same things we would do if we were face to face. The one thing that's going to be missing for sure is that human touch that I think that we rely on a lot, you know, and that ability to read each other's body language. And so sometimes with that kind of thing, we might have to let parents know we need their help there, right? There's a lot that has to go into that part. And I think that we're talking a lot about like screen time, but also remembering that we have other ways that we can communicate with the children and the families too. And that if that's what's better for that child, that particular child, that might be what we need to do, even if it means a one-on-one for some of them, whether through the video screen or on the phone. But I think that the more we can do to make it relevant to their lives, then the more likely they'll be to want to be engaged.
And that's all the basic stuff we do in the classroom. You know, the same techniques we use. But I think also, as Rachel was talking about, going with the interest of the child and the child's developmental needs, because it doesn't matter if they're 4 or 5 and they're struggling in circle time. It doesn't, you know, you don't say, oh, they should be able to do this because they're one of the older children. Also realize what they're able to do in the classroom is not necessarily what they're going to be able to do in a virtual environment. So our expectations of what we know about our children may need to change now that we're in a totally different environment. So whereas my son may have been able to handle a longer group time and be engaged in the classroom, he may not be able to do that in the virtual setting. So our expectations of our knowledge of our children may need to change as well as we're trying to keep them engaged.
I think with that in mind, Jackie, I just want to be reminiscent to keep the teacher's lens on today. And one of the things that some teachers have shared is that they feel worried that they're not fitting enough in, that they're not providing enough content. Mm-hmm. And I had a really good suggestion from a friend of mine. What she did was she created a video library of quick 3 to 5 minute mini lessons. And those mini lessons were things that she would then give out to the group as she thought was appropriate. But then during the small group time, she was able to individualize based on conversations with 3 to 5 children and follow up with them about how that went and what they thought. And so it became a conversation starter and a connection. Oh, did you see the video that I created just for you so that you and I could talk more about that today? And that was a really good strategy that worked for her. So I wanted to make sure and share that out with everybody.
And I think it's really important for teachers to remember too that, you know, if children, let's say children are with us from 8 to 12 every day, they're not in instructional time from 8 to 12. There are transitions that are happening, hand washing, potty breaks, lunch, snack, going outside. There are so many other parts of the day that sometimes I think we get stuck in this mindset that if the children are supposed to be there for 4 hours a day, then I somehow have to get 4 hours of instruction across. And that's not the case. It's not the case at all. It takes much less time to get the same result with smaller groups of children and one-on-one and without all of those transitions. So, you know, keeping that teacher lens on, we have to cut ourselves a break as teachers and realize that we're doing enough, you know. Bill, you talked a little bit about this already, but I wondered if you could maybe talk a little bit about, you know, the whole passive active consumption and what that looks like so that teachers are aware of that language.
Okay. I think it's absolutely important that we as adults who understand that this is the most important job in society, addressing the cognitive, social, and emotional needs of young children, understand that the most effective adult that works with young children is focusing first on relationship, building that relationship with a child. One-on-one, as Jenni so artfully stated, the crucial point is that we know for sure that learning is most effective when it's in a dyad, that's a one-on-one relationship. As soon as you add a third person in a relationship, the learning curve diagonally starts to fall, and it somehow beautifully levels out at around 5 people. That's why small group size should never be more than 5. But the very important thing to understand about language learning is that the way children learn language is from one-on-one interaction with an adult. Absolutely, we hear children talking to each other. Yes, we hear children hearing one child say a curse word and then the whole classroom erupts in it. But the most effective language learning occurs from adult-child interactions. And so it's crucial that we as adults think more in one-on-one, not instruction, but rather one-on-one facilitating the learning process to help a child with their language development. And the only way that we, or the most efficient way we can facilitate language development is by one-on-one interaction with the children. That's kind of difficult when you're doing it in a Zoom interaction because we don't get the eye contact. We don't get the nuances of the body movements that we're using to express our feelings as we're talking. But to the degree that it's possible to use some sort of virtual learning experience, we want to focus more on that one-on-one interaction for language stimulation.
The other thing too, when you were mentioning before about passive and active, I think sometimes we have to really examine the types of media we're using with the children. So whether it's Zoom or whether it's anything else we're asking them to participate in, that it isn't just watching a video or just, these repetitive games that they'll play, or even those puzzles that don't really require them to do anything but move something around, right? Like I've heard people say, oh, these are educational apps, but are they really? Because that's really not teaching much besides finger control on an iPad, right? And so finding ways to make it meaningful and connecting it to that child through that relationship that you were just mentioning. And I was thinking about this as you were talking. And if my child's teacher was working with her and knew this about her, she could do something similar. So we have lots of birds in our yard and we love the birds and we look at the birds. And there is the Cornell University has cameras on a lot of different bird nests. They have a huge study. So I and Elsie and I looked at that together because she was interested in birds. And then we talked about the nesting and how that related to the birds she saw. And she drew pictures out the window of the birds she was observing. And so in this way, it became an active experience where just watching the birds on the video would have been passive. Does that make sense? Kind of. And so it's through those relationships that we learn about the children and what they're interested in so that we can facilitate that kind of more active consumption of media so that it's not just sitting there like watching Beauty and the Beast on replay, like, where they get like, does anybody else have like Zoom zombies or I call it tablet zombie when Elsie's been looking at it for too long, right? Like I'm like, yoo-hoo.
Well, and you can do this in group time too, like you were saying, Rachel. Let's go find something red in your house and come back and show it to me. They're getting up, they're moving, and they're actively coming back to the screen and doing something, so they're not just sitting there being passive. So our small groups and our large groups, we can do the exact same thing of the active. Have them go do something. Have them go show you something so that they're actively participating in this group work that you may be doing.
So I want to switch gears a little bit and get to a couple of more questions before our time runs out. What role do parents play in supporting technology-based teaching? So Rachel, can you start us off on that?
Sure. I think one of the biggest mind shifts that had to happen for us was thinking about now parents are part of our teaching team. And that was a big undertaking for everybody, for the parents and the teachers both. And thinking about that, just like when we're working with our teaching teams face to face, whoever's on our teaching team with us, and sometimes it's just us ourselves, but our team becomes the other teachers in the center and we all kind of work together on things, that we have to have communication, we have to talk to each other, we have to be aware that some will be brand new, kind of like student teachers who we might need to scaffold a little bit more for, where others will just maybe have a better understanding of this kind of thing. Maybe they've observed in your classroom. Maybe they are reading parenting articles that align with your teaching philosophy already, and meeting the parents where they are and helping them know how they can support us. Because the reality is we're not there with the children. And so the parents are going to have to do a little bit of this higher level facilitation, because we know children learn through play. And how much of the playing are they going to be doing just in our calls? There's only so much play we can facilitate through our group time calls, through our videos, and then we prompt it, and then it's going to be on the rest of our teaching team, on our parents, to help make sure that it goes to that next level. And even in setting the environment to promote play and promote learning is something that we need their partnership on. And so from the very beginning, letting them know that that's a partnership. And some of us didn't know that from the very beginning. And so we had to kind of go back and work on that. And moving forward, though, now we know better, we can do better as far as that part goes.
Rachel, what you're alluding to is clearly the indication that since parents are a child's first teacher, we're really involved, engaged in these activities with the children to support the teachers, the parent as teacher, not really for the parent to support us. We have to find ways to support the parents, to empower parents to realize that they are the key ingredient in their child's learning.
And when we look at the positive things that are coming out, is we all of a sudden have a great way to have family engagement happening. You know, this is what we want to happen in our centers. We want our parents to be this active. Yes, they're being forced to be this active right now, but let's tap into that and let's cultivate those relationships with the parents. So when we are going back into it, they're not so nervous about collaborating with us, and we can keep some of this ongoing with them and have that family engagement increase in the classroom. So we're forcing them for the engagement, but it's really what we know is good philosophy, is that partnership with the parents. We know that's so important for our children.
I know one of the big questions that has come up around all of this is, what about when guidance issues arise? What do you do?
Angie, you're muted. I don't know if you were about to say something before.
Oh yeah, she was muted.
Thank you. I just wanted to share that, and this goes along with the guidance piece, is that it's really our job to provide some educational supports to the families so that they do understand how valuable they are in the life of that child. I've worked with many parents who feel very anxious about that relationship with the school system because they have had negative or worrisome experiences themselves. Or maybe they just remember what high school was like, sitting in a desk and, being in a classroom for 45 minutes and having to work really, really hard. And so because that's their thought process, they think that that's what they should do now for their youngest children. And they just simply don't quite understand that it's natural for a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old even to get up and need to move their bodies much more frequently. That sitting in a chair for 30, 40 minutes can be incredibly uncomfortable for a body. And I mean, even me sitting here tonight, I keep fidgeting in my chair. So it's important that we remember that those things that we as adults feel are very natural and honestly more prominent in our younger children. So any education that we can provide to the families about what it looks like, what play can look like in the home, and how that is the education that's happening is really, really important. So a teacher friend of mine shared that for one lesson, she had the parent and child take the tablet to their pantry, and they got out canned goods, and they named the letters that they could see on the canned goods. It was something that the parent didn't understand how valuable it was, but afterwards that parent felt such success because she was able to help her child find so many different letters and recognize them in so many different types of print, which was really cool. From a guidance experience, I think that's where we can, again, just provide that educational piece, letting families know that it's okay that they walk away, that we're not worried, that they'll come back when they're ready. But again, back to the idea that we need to have a set of maybe some video vignettes that parents can visit when it's appropriate for them, because our schedules may not always mesh when we're at home.
And Angie, one of the questions that we got in, I want to direct this specifically to you, because I know you had 5 children trying to go through all of this virtual learning. So the question was, how do I get parents to send back the work they've completed with their children? So I think the first thing that I want to say about that is, I think we have to think about what work we're talking about. So if we're talking about children, that are preschool, infants, toddlers, what work are we talking about, right? Did you ask them to draw a picture and send it back to add to a collage? That's one thing. But we should not be sending home worksheet packets and tracing packets for children to do during this virtual early learning time. Developmentally appropriate practice doesn't change just because we're in this virtual environment.
Exactly.
So, I think if you're talking about helping parents, return something that is appropriate, like, everyone drew a picture of something and they're going to add it to, a class quilt, include a stamped envelope. And mail that to the family so that all they have to do is put it in the envelope and mail it back. I think that's going to be one of the easiest things to do, or let them take a picture of it and text it to you. We want to use the easiest formats possible. But when we get into elementary school, this does become more of an issue. And you had many children trying to work through this. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. I think supporting some of the teachers in Cincinnati Public Schools, I heard a lot of them talk about using apps like Class Dojo to be able to get families to interact and share fun things that they were doing with their children while promoting the learning. From my experience with my younger elementary age children in my own home, I have to say that I struggled to keep track of all of the different parts and pieces, and they utilized different avenues for them to engage with. So Google Documents is a wonderful thing, and yet I had trouble managing my own Google Documents for work, let alone trying to follow up on my 3rd grader and my 5th grader and my 11th grader and my 12th grader. It becomes slightly overwhelming. So as a parent, I will be honest and say that I let some things go, because I would have conversations at the dinner table with my children. Hey, did you get your work done today? Can you tell me what that felt like? Was it hard? Did it challenge you, or was it something you were able to get done pretty quickly? And based on those dinner time conversations, I felt pretty confident that I knew what was going on. And then I did the teacher check, usually on a weekly basis, just because I'm not a micromanager of my own self, so I don't want to micromanage the teacher and my kids. I have to give them some autonomy as they're growing up and doing some of those things. So the best way I found to manage it was to do regular check-ins with my kids at dinner time, just because it was the easiest thing to do. And I started doing a few things on my own because I didn't necessarily, I wanted to make sure that my kids got some real life experiences that they could learn during this time too. So one example that we did, they didn't know how to address an envelope, and they didn't know which corner the stamp went in if they wanted to mail a letter to their friend. And so we did some cousin pen pal type things, which was really fun. They would create little things to send to the other, and there was a pretty good back and forth for several weeks. So we tried to keep it simple. We tried to just be realistic with what we could do, because both my husband and I were working full-time from home in addition to having to manage all of the schedules. So did I miss some steps? You betcha. I was very fortunate to work with some teachers who gave us some grace and space to acknowledge that. And I have kids who did the best that they could during the time. And so here we are. I'm grateful it's summer.
Yeah.
If our goal,
sorry, Bill, go ahead.
If our goal is to focus on supporting parents, there are two things we want to help parents understand in terms of their role as the first teacher of their children. That a child's work is play in early childhood. And so it is crucial that they see the value of just allowing their children to play. And instead of thinking of teaching something, we have to help parents understand that learning is caught, it's not taught. So how can I, as a parent, facilitate the learning process of, like in my case with our 6 children when they were growing up, facilitating the process that the child is acquiring as he or she is engaged in playing an activity that they choose on their own. So that's where the parent working with the child is so important, even if it's with screen time, with technology. The parent should not set the tablet up and then walk away. The parent needs to understand the value of engaging with their child in the process of play.
If you don't mind, just real quick on that, something you mentioned, so play is their mode of learning. And to not forget that early childhood doesn't end at preschool. That
No.
Play is still the mode of learning. I mean, really, we all say, we just call it hands-on learning when we're adults. We all learn best in that state of interacting with concrete things in a frame of mind that feels playful. It never stops. And so helping the parents to understand the ways that we're trying to sort of promote some of the academic skills that they're looking for, right? And so if the question is, how do I get work turned in? Then maybe we flip it a little bit to help parents find ways to document the work that's happening through play. And so maybe we accept more of those pictures through text, like you were saying before, Jenny, or a quick check-in on the dinner night, on the nighttime dinner chat that you're talking about, Angie, like just a real quick, or an email or whatever. And as teachers, we do have to guard ourselves because it's going to start inundating us, because parent schedules might not align to teacher schedules, but maybe filtering it out, like, okay, I know that text came through, I know that email came through, but I'm not going to attend to it till my working hours tomorrow. But still allowing the parents the grace of participating in the communication that way. You know, it's a really big balancing act. And even though, like Belle, I know, like, it's not best practice for me to set up a tablet and leave her. But sometimes, and this is what all of our parents are facing, right, is that we're trying to balance this. So even just saying to them sometimes, okay, this is a group time that she'll probably be able to participate in without as much help from you if you need to work on something close by. But this other session we're doing later on, I'm going to need you to be one-on-one with us and interacting with her. And letting them know that everything that's going on the screen is important and will relate to their outside of the screen life, will also, I think, help parents want to be engaged in that a little more.
So we have about 5 minutes left. Jackie, I want to make sure we get to this next question. One of the questions that we had was, what's the best platform for early childhood? And so that really kind of leads us into, how do we choose what technology resources to use? You know, I was on a Facebook page with one of my friends of mine, and she posted these great early childhood resources. And I went and looked at them, and they were the most awful, inappropriate teaching things that I could have ever posted. I mean, even just the frame of the video, I picked out about 5 things from the background that I thought, if this woman knew anything about teaching, those would not even be on the wall. So there's so much out there. How do we choose good resources?
Well, the first thing is we want to go to the experts. And so I'm going to share some resources that are really fantastic. We have like the Erickson Institute of Technology and Early Childhood Centers. That's a great resource. They've got so many wonderful articles, especially right now. We have the Excellence in Early Learning Digital Media Awards, which is great because they're giving awards out to the best places. 0 to 3 for all of our young ones. We'll talk about that screen time and what we should be looking for our young infants and toddlers. One of my favorite ones as a parent and also an instructional designer, but as a parent, one of my favorite ones is called Common Sense Media. And that has so many different avenues for educators and for families. But you can actually type in apps and TV programs and books and see what level it is for the children, what it's ranked, whether it's developmentally appropriate or not. So it's a great resource just to say, oh, I found this app called Bugs and Buttons. Is this a good app for us to be able to check out? I've done that a lot with my son in things like that. So those are resources, those are our experts we want to look to. The other thing that I want us to think about is how we can enhance. So we've been talking a lot about the quantity of time for screen time, but the one thing I want us to think about is the quality of time. So if we are going to look at screen time and what we're doing in screen time, you want it to be quality. So that's why we're going to go to our experts. Bill also mentioned a little bit about what I call co-viewing and viewing it together. I think Rachel also talked about that as well. So co-viewing is some things that we want to consider. And then the other thing, and if I have time, I'll share my screen, some resources we can use. It's not just Zoom, it's not just video chats, it's not just small groups. There are technology we can use to have the children be interactive. Yes, we're gonna have to pull the parents in to help us with some of these. But one of my favorite ones that I just discovered and I've been using, I cannot share the screen. Chad, can you give me that?
Chad, can you help?
Can you help for
that?
Share? Let me see. Okay, now I can share the screen. So one of my favorite ones is called Padlet. Can we see it now?
Yep.
Okay, so what this is super easy to use. I just did a KWL chart, and what I want to know, what do I wonder and what have I learned? The parents and the children can post anything they want. It's super easy. You just hit this plus. You can write anything, just write anything. You can add pictures. These pictures are just from the websites. They can add their own pictures from cameras. So when we talked a couple of sessions ago about assessment, you can also tap into this for assessment. You can tap into what are they interested in, what do they know, and where can I take them next for this topic. I did this topic because Angie had talked about this topic for transportation. Another one, it's not geared towards, this one's not geared towards early childhood, but I'm going to show you how you can add pictures. You could just ask, what are you doing on your summer vacation? And they can post pictures. This is actually, this middle picture is a picture of a bridge, a suspension bridge my son and his class made. So it's a personal picture. Actually, this one is the lines from Reggio Emilia when I visited. So you can post any pictures. They can snap a picture and they can also put comments. Things to consider is the privacy. I talked about that a couple of sessions ago, protecting our children. So when you make these, you want to go down here. We have, sorry, it's under the settings, the privacy. I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time finding. There's a privacy setting. I'm sorry. Of course, I can't find it this minute when I'm trying to talk and do the same thing at the same time. But there is a privacy setting. Here it is, private. So I can make it private, password protected, secret, or public. Public, everybody can view. So depending on how you tag it, you can also say, I don't want the names posted, or I do want the names posted. So if you keep it private and it's just your own classroom, it's fine to say, oh, Rachel posted this. I can see her name under it. So you'll want to hit those privacy settings. And then it's really easy. I actually shared this to the panelists. I just copied the link to the clipboard and emailed it to them. All of the panelists can actually add to this board if they want to. You can do email. You can actually do a QR code so the parents can just click it on their phone. So those are ways that makes the learning more interactive, and we get to know the interest of the children. Another thing, if you want to do videos, and you can keep these private as well, is Flipgrid. So you send, it's the same thing. I don't have it up on my screen, but very similar. You do Flipgrid, and they can do little video sessions, and then it'll all go into one thing. My son's teacher actually made a whole little video that she sent out to the entire class. But when we talk about that language and just tell me a story about your day, it can be a very, very simple prompt. All of these I do say, though, because we're relying on the parents to help, and the children might not like the medium, make it optional. If they are not comfortable with making a video, that's fine. If they want to pull something from the internet for this picture, or if they want to take a picture from their house, that's fine. So leave a lot of flexibility for the children and the parents to participate at the level that they feel comfortable. And then you also might want to make little quick tutorials. These are really easy tools to use, but quick tutorials about how do I do this? You know, like I said, you just click the plus sign and you can add anything you want to. So those are some tools that I have know about that I think would make learning a little bit more interactive as well.
We are unfortunately out of time already. That went by so quick. The team here is going to work on putting some resources together for you that will be available on SWAYC's website, along with the replays of all of these videos. We do want to leave you with this final thought in that, you know, we really need for teachers to take care of themselves during this time. Because if you're not taking care of yourselves, you're not going to have anything left to give. And we all have been to workshops and trainings about how to take care of stress. You know, we get compassion fatigue. Now we're getting Zoom fatigue. So it's just really important to remember that, you know, screen time limits matter for you too. And to think about what are some ways that you're doing self-care so that you stay in a healthy mental place for all of this. So Chad, I'm going to turn it back over to you to talk about future events. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Jenny. We do have some upcoming Ohio-approved training. So if you need professional development hours, please check out the free trainings that are available. We only have a few spots left, and a few of the trainings, they're all conducted by Dr. Jenni Jacobs. They are on different days and times. You can visit bit.ly/SWO, free, OA, and I'll put that in the chat right now. And that concludes part 3 of our panel discussion series on families, children, and remote early learning. Thank you to all of our attendees, our panelists, and our sponsors. And if you have any questions, please email us at info@swayc.org. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day.